Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, The Pending EEOC Wellness Rule Changes, How Quizzify Turns Lemons into Lemonade. My name is Mark Delicave. I'm a Vice President here at Quizzify in Account Management and Sales. And as we begin our webinar, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Al Lewis. Al is our CEO of Quizzify, and this webinar is a junction of law, economics, and population health. And Al's background includes all three. He is a Harvard-trained attorney, graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Harvard, where he also taught economics. Al authored or co-authored 3 books on population health, including 2 trade bestsellers, Why Nobody Believes the Numbers and Cracking Health Costs. And get ready with the polling feature to answer a few pertinent trivia questions. Al is also a trivia buff who wrote a best-selling trivia game, and he was on Jeopardy once.
Am I hearable? Is the audio on? Thank you.
Al, I can hear you.
Okay, I just was not able to hear myself. Okay, so thank you very much for that intro, Mark. And the first question we usually get in the chat box after that introduction is, well, did he win on Jeopardy? And I'll just repeat what Mark said in the intro, which is Al was on Jeopardy once. Okay, so just a little disclaimer first. Quizzify is not a law firm. We don't even play lawyers on TV. This webinar does not constitute legal advice, and the best legal advice is to have your in-house counsel review this presentation and then give you legal advice based on it. Okay, we have some big news here for you, and this is the agenda. We're going to start with a brief background and what just happened with the EEOC and what could happen next, and then we'll get into what it means for you and what to do about it. But first, let's step into the Wayback Machine for a brief background on voluntary incentive rules. There is an extensive background covered in previous webinars. We can send you a summary of the extensive background, but we're basically starting with the understanding that everybody kind of knows what happened at the end of last year, which is a December court decision ruled that clinically based wellness programs must be voluntary, as the dictionary defines it, starting in 2019, meaning that no significant penalties and incentives can be involved. The EEOC originally promised proposed rules under this, following this, by August of 2018. Promise is actually strong. They said they might get around to doing it by August 2018, but they ended up not doing it. If you want more information, you'll be able to click on the link. We will be sending you this presentation if you ask. So the breaking news is what just happened last week. The EEOC just announced that they will not even be issuing a notice of proposed rulemaking for new wellness rules until January. So the original August 2018 deadline is way off the table, which means that there is no safe harbor for employers for January and many months beyond January. Now, I don't know how much everybody knows about the EEOC, but making rules is a multi-step process that takes months. They make the rules, they put out comments, they revise. So the lack of a safe harbor will be relevant for a long time. Now, a safe harbor means that there are certain things in which an employee can't even get into court. And it used to be through 2018 that as long as you kept your penalties and incentives to 30% or less, an employee could not get into court. Before the rules were made, employees did actually sue. But starting in 2019, the safe harbors will be limited to, number one, offering non-medical alternatives to screening, like Quizzify, or dispensing with penalties or incentives altogether for screenings and HRAs. Now, I say altogether, but you are probably okay with modest incentives like gift cards. I think that the court would consider those to be voluntary. Sometimes you run in an event to raise money for charity, and at the end you get a T-shirt or a gift card or something like that. It's still voluntary. However, if you continue to use large penalties and incentives a court might hold that you are violating an employee's ADA or GINA rights, Americans with Disabilities Act or Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. So let's just start. We just want to make sure that the polling feature is working here. So we're going to start with an easy question. To use Jeopardy lingo, I think this would be a $400 question. I'm sorry, $200 question. Which of the following will be true come January 2019 if no rules are forthcoming? Get your polling up because you're going to have 15 seconds to do the polling, and then it will show up in 20 seconds. A, it will be illegal to do any wellness programs involving penalties, but incentives will be okay. B, it will be illegal to do any wellness programs involving penalties or incentives. C, it will be illegal to do clinical wellness programs involving medical exams like screening or health assessments, or D, none of the above. So now we're going to wait a few seconds, and you are punching in your answers, and then Earl is going to show us what the answer, what the percentages are. And we'll see if this works. The poll is ended. The votes are in. And the answer will be forthcoming in 10 seconds. Okay, we have an answer. The answer is about half the folks said none of the above, which is actually true. Let me just briefly explain why the others are not true, which is because it's not illegal to do these things. You can still do these things, but you are outside of the safe harbor. No, illegal would mean you pay a fine or you go to jail or something. Outside the safe harbor just means that you can't be sure you're not going to be sued. Okay, well, that worked out. So I think the rest of the polls will be looking good. Now, being outside the safe harbor might be considered an unacceptable risk for your company for 4 reasons. Number one, plaintiff attorneys read trade publications to learn about new potential lawsuits. This is what they do. They look for reasons to sue people. Number two, even if the lawsuit itself is only, one thing, remember the PR and morale impact. Wellness disputes always have negative PR and morale impact. And you might remember Penn State, that made national news for their wellness dispute. Number three, employees have already contacted attorneys about this, including me. And remember, I'm not even a practicing attorney. Quizzify is not a law firm. And we've been contacted to say, how can we sue these people come January? And number four, this might come as a news flash to some folks, but there was a survey that Willis Towers Watson put out that revealed employees do not like wellness. Wellness has a net promoter score, which is on a scale of negative 100 to 100, and it's the most popular satisfaction rating of minus 52. To put that in perspective, the large industry with the lowest net promoter score was the TV and internet services industry, and they had a +2, which means that employees would vastly rather sit at home waiting for the cable guy not to show up than to take a screening. Now, the only way this is not happening in January is if Congress overrides this federal court decision. And we're going to tell you we think that's unlikely because we've been talking to some folks on both sides of the aisle. They're doing their research, actually. This is what staff is for in Congress. And they're learning that punitive wellness programs have failed and, in fact, often backfire. More importantly, they are concerned about the reaction of voters. And you might remember the West Virginia teachers' strike. You might have thought it was about wages, and to some large degree it was, but it was also about their wellness program. And you can see a couple of headlines here. Delegates criticize West Virginia Public Employee Insurance Association wellness program as an invasion of privacy. The teachers would not go back to work until the wellness program was repealed. The irony was theirs was actually quite a good wellness program. It was far from the worst that we've ever seen. There's also already a congressional candidate who's running against the pending override legislation, saying that this legislation is quite comprehensive. In addition to allowing employers to do punitive wellness programs, it allows employers to collect employee DNA. And this congressional candidate says the GOP wants your DNA. It gives a whole lot of ways to fight back. So I don't think Congress is in a mood to do anything particularly controversial, but we could be wrong. So assume that this is going to happen in January. What does this mean? It means sizable incentives and penalties for all screenings in most HRAs are no longer in a safe harbor. It means that because of the EEOC passing on even starting to make the rules until 2019, there is no way you can know the rules in time to design your 2019 program. This is not only probably an unacceptable legal risk, but even a vendor who actually is in the business of coercive clinical wellness programs has said publicly that a company with a conservative risk profile should discontinue coercive clinical wellness programs. And if they're saying that, you'd be pretty darn sure it's good advice. Raise your hand if your company does not have a conservative risk profile. That's rhetorical. You don't actually have to raise your hand. So, and in general, this may actually be a good time to re-examine coercive outcomes-based wellness programs because it's actually been proven beyond doubt that exactly this kind of program has no noticeable positive impact. The National Bureau of Economic Research said it. Now, they only covered the first year, but they also said they had absolutely no reason to think the second year was going to be different based on what they were saying. The Wellness Association itself, HERO, highlighted a case study showing that wellness loses money in their own publication. That was the best they could do. It was a great study. One of the reasons it was a great showed wellness loses money is they did it very well. And I personally have an unclaimed $3 million reward for proving wellness breaks even. So it's not quite clear why one would want to do these programs anyway, and this might be a good time to re-examine them. So let's talk about how this will affect your program and what will be covered. First, okay, so here's what is covered. Number one, as we talked about, just to emphasize, all incentivized, heavily incentivized workplace biometric screens are effective, meaning you can no longer screen your employees at work with large dollars or a significantly richer health benefit on the line and expect no consequences. Be legally protected from no consequences. Now, outcomes-based wellness programs are still okay, but if you think about it, few employees would submit to those without a large penalty or incentive. Participatory wellness programs are okay, and for those, generally, the incentives are much more modest, or occasionally there is none, and people just do it because they want to know what their numbers are every few years. Let's focus on the red words here in the next few slides. Most HRAs are going to have to be rewritten. Many fitness-related activities are unaffected, and crash dieting contests are unaffected. So let's look at these words in particular. Okay, so here's an example of a question that you can continue to ask. You can continue to ask in these HRAs, which is how many vegetables do you eat? But here's a question that you can't continue to ask, which is, are you depressed? There's a lot of questions in these HRAs about depression, and none of them are going to be okay. Not that anyone answers them honestly anyway. Here's an example of an okay versus a not okay. Would you like information about diabetes, but not okay? Do you have diabetes, or have you been told you have diabetes, or something like that? Another one. Would you like information about weight control? Not okay. Are you obese, or what do you weigh? So what happens to HRAs? You can't ask most of the questions you're used to asking them. Well, you either make them completely voluntary, or you rewrite them to avoid all medical inquiries. And the problem is that the rewritten HRAs won't be comparable to previous years where you did make medical inquiries. You won't be able to do most cross-tab analyses because you won't know who is clinically at risk. So, for instance, you won't know if obese people eat worse or exercise less than people of normal weight. Now, it does happen, and we'll send you this link if you like, that Quizzify actually anticipated that this court decision was going to happen 2 years ago. We built the whole company assuming that someday, whether it was going to be legislative, administrative, or judicial, somebody was going to observe that the word voluntary is not synonymous with the word involuntary, and therefore Quizzify designed an HRA, and in fact the entire product, to educate employees on clinical issues without making medical inquiries, and therefore triggering ADA and GINA and their voluntariness provisions. So let's look at some other activities to see what's covered and what's not. It is okay to say, walk around the block and we'll give you some money, or wear a Fitbit and we'll give you some money. You can actually track people all you want. You can track their location, you can track how much they're moving around, and base any amount of money on that. Maybe they won't like it, but you can certainly do it. But what you can't do is you can't say, walk around the block and let us see if it made you healthier, and then we'll give you some money. Anytime you start talking about measuring health, you're out of luck. So a gray area is checkups. Now, it has been, nobody knows, because this is new, whether you will be able to say to an employee, prove that you got a checkup. What we certainly can say is that it will not be okay to say to an employee, have a doctor send in your numbers. And by the way, speaking of things that it might be a good time to re-examine, this may be a good excuse to re-examine annual checkups, which according to all the research have no clinical value. So here's the New England Journal of Medicine editorializing against the annual physical. Here's Choosing Wisely. Annual physicals usually don't make you healthier. Here's JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association. Compared with usual care, offers of health checks were not associated with lower rates of all risk, all-cause mortality and morbidity, mortality from cardiovascular disease, or mortality from cancer. They're associated with more diagnoses and more drug treatment. So if you want employees to get even more medical care than they're getting for you right now, they should be getting annual checkups. Now, what Quizzify recommends is 2 checkups in your 20s, 3 in your 30s, 4 in your 40s, 5 in your 50s, and maybe annually after that. Now, we don't play doctors on TV here any more than we play lawyers on TV, but our questions are reviewed by doctors at Harvard Medical School, and if they, sometimes they propose them as well, and if they're in agreement with us or they propose it, we're in agreement with them, we are uniquely allowed to put their shield on our question. This particular very mnemonic, very sensible rate of medical exams does in fact carry the Harvard Medical School shield. So that's what we would recommend to optimize between overdiagnosis and appropriate medical care. So here's some other things that are okay and not okay in 2019. You might hear vendors say, oh, this is going to mean we can't do free flu shots. Of course you can do free flu shots. It is okay to ask who smokes or how much you smoke, but you can't test nicotine. Smoking is not considered a medical condition. It's okay to say, do you take some drinks? How much do you drink? Not that anyone's going to tell you the truth. But you can't say, are you an alcoholic? And likewise, it's okay to ask about illegal drug use, but you can't, once again, I don't know why you would, but you can't ask if somebody is addicted to drugs. Now, reward-driven crash dieting contests are going to still be okay. Generally speaking, because they're not generally tied to insurance or wellness plan, but they have separate rewards. However, we would note that these are a fantastically bad idea and are more likely to harm employees than benefit them. And even an organization that is offering advice on how to win one of these competitions says, frankly, this is a really bad idea and it can create all sorts of bad habits and damaging activities by the participants as they starve, dehydrate, and supplement themselves in an effort to win. On the other hand, winning can make you feel great. Okay, so, well, there's the pluses and there's the minuses. So this might be a good opportunity to lose those as well. So you have a lot of exposure. And let's talk about how you can inoculate yourself. Let's talk about how you can make this what seems to be lemon into total lemonade, into basically a very positive thing, at a very worst a non-issue. In order to do that, you need to offer an alternative to screening. Note that alternative to screening is not the same as what you probably are used to hearing, a reasonable alternative standard. Reasonable alternative standard is an Affordable Care Act term. It is not a Americans with Disabilities Act or GINA term, and the court decision involved ADA and GINA. So the alternative could be you can still require a choice of screenings or something else not involving medical exams or inquiries. Example, health literacy training, i.e. Quizzify, or making your employees wear Fitbits. There just has to be no medical inquiries and no medical exams in the alternative. And I might add that either alternative, wearing Fitbits or health literacy training, are more appealing to employees and they don't harm them. So if you offer these as alternatives, you can maintain your entire program as is if you want to, provided that somebody can earn the entire incentive or avoid the entire penalty without medical exams or inquiries. That's an alternative, and let me just distinguish offer an alternative from the reasonable alternative standard. The reasonable alternative standard, ACA, is something that employees must petition for it, prove to the HR department why they can't do conventional wellness the regular way, and the decision is the employer's. There's no oversight by the government. There's no appeal or anything like that. The reasonable alternative standard is usually still something clinical, like go to the doctor and do such and such, and it's usually actually also quite expensive for the company. Distinguish that from offering an alternative, as opposed to the reasonable alternative standard starting in 2019. This is a straight-off offer, something that employees can just ask for, and it can't be clinical in nature. We got a question that is actually, we've gotten some questions that we're going to save to the end, but this is a question that is relevant to this particular slide. Please address that the ACA will still be effective after January 2019. Yes, the ACA is still in place. The wellness provision of the ACA is still in place, meaning that programs have to, it can be offered, and they have to, it has to be reasonably designed to reduce risk or prevent disease. So ACA is still in effect. It's ADA and GINA where the voluntariness issue means that you cannot offer a significant incentive or penalty. Now, there are a few slides that you absolutely, this is the value add from this is how you can transfer, or how you can avoid this liability risk altogether. And that is you insist on indemnification for your entire wellness program from a vendor offering an alternative, like Quizzify does. And why on earth should you take the liability risk when you've got vendors who are willing to do it? You can use this clause, and we don't have it copyrighted. You can cut and paste it. Any vendor can do it, but it will transfer the risk to vendors like Quizzify from you. Because, and I'll just read off the key words here, since we're an alternative and we make the screenings in HRA truly voluntary, meaning somebody can still get screenings in HRA, but it's now truly voluntary because they don't need to do it in order to get their incentive, thus removing the program from EEOC jurisdiction because of its voluntariness. We will indemnify you, or if you're a vendor, your customers, for any adverse judgment on cases brought by the, I'm sorry, I just saw a really good question here, and I'm going to get to it in a second. Brought by the employee that involves involuntariness because it's not involuntary. And we put some limitations on this, $5,000 deductible, 80% of any award. Other vendors are willing to do this. There are some good questions coming in that I think we will wait until the end to answer. Oh, it says, actually, this one we should do on this particular slide. One of the slides says it will not be okay to ask how much an employee weighs. However, morbid obesity is considered a disability, but normal deviation is not. It is not. Our understanding is that it is not okay to ask somebody how much they weigh, and if we're wrong about that, we will send out a correction. Now we're getting many questions along the lines of what if you do the screening in 2018 and the liability and the change to the benefits design takes place in 2019. So we're going to answer those all at once. Meanwhile, let's go to a polling question. which is false. False about programs with typical incentives or penalties if the EEOC does not publish the rules by January 2019. A, you are exposed to employee lawsuits if you don't offer an alternative like Quizzify or Exercise. B, your in-house counsel should advise you to cut way back on incentives and penalties. C, it will be up to the courts to interpret the word voluntary. Or D, the old EEOC rules remain in effect after January 2019 until the new ones come up. Now we got 15 seconds, and let me see, while we're waiting for the poll, if I can maybe answer one of the other questions here. I think we're going to save the other questions to the end. There's one question that I frankly don't know the answer to here, and I'll tell you what it is once we do. Where does the HIPAA incentive limit come into play for incentives for wellness programs under ACA? ACA is not affected by this, that much I can tell you. So the answers now are in on the poll, and the winner is D, the old EEOC rules temporarily remain in effect with more than a majority. That is correct. That is false. That is the false answer. Everything else up here is true. You will be exposed to lawsuits. Your in-house counsel should give you some good advice, and the courts will interpret the word voluntary. Now, we'll go to sample question 3. What factors suggest that employee lawsuits are unlikely? Employee lawsuits over wellness have been unsuccessful in the past. The majority of employees like wellness. That's according to a Virgin Pulse study in 2014, 86% like it. They realize they could be fired, or none of the above. And we're getting several more questions about ACA. I just want to make clear that this is an ADA and GINA lawsuit, an ADA and GINA issue on voluntariness that is causing you to have to dramatically reduce or eliminate your incentives and penalties. And we're coming up with an answer here. You know, the 20 seconds between when the poll ends and when the answers come up seems much longer, but it is only 20 seconds. Okay, the winner is none of the above with an overwhelming majority, and that is in fact the case. Employee lawsuits have been unsuccessful, but that was under different rules that the court had not defined voluntariness. Majority of employees do not like wellness. We showed that, and the EEOC has some anti-retaliatory protections in it, which means that employees cannot be fired for bringing a lawsuit or even threatening to bring a lawsuit. Okay, let's go to question 4. Which of the following questions will least likely be in the safe harbor for health risk assessment starting in 2019? Are you comfortable with your weight? Do you smoke? How much do you drink? Do you often feel down in the dumps?
Al, here's a question that we might be able to talk about while we're waiting for this poll here, is that the vendor data shows that health and wellness benefits are very important to people, but they also, but you say that they really don't like wellness. And how can both of these be true?
Well, that's a great question. The way that the question was phrased in the Virgin Pulse study was, how important is the health and wellness benefit? If you had separated those out and said, how important is having a health benefit, you would get close to 100% of people. If you said, how important is to you that you get screened every year and told to lose weight, you get close to 0% of people. So they conflated two very opposite answers there, and that's why they got the answer they did. So we have an answer now for this polling question, which is we have the majority. It should actually, to be honest, have been a large majority, saying the one that is least likely to be in the safe harbor is, do you often feel down in the dumps? That's correct. That's a synonym for depression, and would not be considered to be askable. So let's turn to Quizzify as more than just an insurance policy against the EEOC, and kind of describe to you why it might make sense to do this kind of thing anyway. We'll look at how much money is at stake for everybody and what employees can learn while you are avoiding employee liability issues. The amount of money at stake, well, you have, this is a 4-year study from, and this is Medi-Medis. So these are people who are spending somebody else's money, much like you are, on medical care. And the green are people with low health literacy, and the blue are people with higher health literacy. And if you don't understand the way healthcare works, you typically end up spending a whole lot more money of someone else's money than if you do understand. So in educating employees in health literacy can bring that green somewhat nearer to the blue. We'll never get all the way to the blue. And where people use this stuff, this is just one example. Employees use vastly too many screens, and a good HRA question can help reduce that number. So if you look at MRIs, this is the U.S. versus the rest of the developed world. By the way, 2/3 of these countries have better health outcomes than the U.S., and you can see that we are at 107 and the average is 52 for MRIs. Now for CAT scans, you might remember that that we didn't do so well in the Winter Olympics in February. However, if CAT scans had been an event, we would have run away with the gold. We're up there at 240, and the next highest is 202. These are perfect examples of things that employees get far too many of. So we're going to jump right to question 6 for another poll. This is a typical Quizify question. You might, if you're paying attention, you'll notice there was no question 5, and that's why we put this together before the EEOC memo came out, and question 5 got mooted. The most popular over-the-counter drug is heartburn medication, proton pump inhibitors. Which is true about regular daily, long-term daily use of these drugs, Prilosec, Prevacid, and Nexium? A, you should take them on a daily basis for them to continue working. B, long-term use can lead to flatulence. C, there are suspected long-term adverse effects not listed on the label, like heart attacks, kidney stones, and fractures. Or D, all of the above. And Mark, while we're waiting, is there any other question that?
Yeah, it says you've been talking a lot about medical exams or medical queries, and are they still disallowed even if the employer does not see either of these results?
Oh my goodness, that is a great question. No. I'm sorry. The answer is it's not whether the employer sees them. If they are seen, and if the employer will never see, should never see the results, but the employer is the one who has the penalty. So the answer is yes. If the employer never sees the results, they still are not allowed.
Okay.
Okay, so that's another good question. So the answer that people are answering is in fact C, which and we have a bare majority for C, which is the correct answer. And let's just briefly go through the other answers. You emphatically should not be taking them on a daily basis. The label says 2 weeks. Do not take these things long-term, or you're going to have this stuff happen, which means the answer is not all of the above. And in terms of long-term use leading to flatulence, I'm just going to suggest my strategy, which is to blame the dog. And here are some stories about these things. They may increase risk of kidney damage, higher risk of death, and fracture risk. There are actually all sorts of other things as well that get on here. So let's do another, just to show you how this differs from a typical HRA that is not going to be allowed anymore, actually. Let's look at question 7. Which milk is best for reducing diabetes risk? Low-fat or skim, whole, almond, or soy? And Mark, while we're waiting, is there any other question that's popped in that we queued up, maybe?
Well, these one comment was that the questions that we're asking look kind of medical. Is there any relation to the questions that Quizify asks in a medical inquiry or not?
No, Quizify does not ask medical inquiries. There are no medical inquiries in Quizify. We give information about things. We don't ask people things that are personal, private PHI. Okay, we have a very widespread distribution here, with the correct answer actually getting the lowest score, which is that whole milk is the best milk for reducing diabetes risk. Now, you might say, whoa, but it was thought that it was skim milk and that dairy fat was bad. This was a bunch of years ago. However, in milk, whole is the new skim. And there are a whole bunch of links you could go. We will send you this if you want. and we'll link right to this, which links to a whole bunch of other things. But almond milk ended up being the number one guess. Almond milk is basically sugar water with a little almond in it. And if you look at some of these headlines down here, lay off the almond milk, you ignorant hipsters. Almond milk comes in dead last. That is the least thing that you should be doing. Now, meanwhile, if you're using typical HRAs, and this is a very popular HRA, and we have just cut and pasted a screenshot from it, and it says that the healthier choices are low-fat or fat-free milk, low-fat or non-fat yogurt. Well, number one, non-fat yogurt tends to be full of sugar. And number two, this is an old answer. This is not the correct answer, right? What is believed to be the correct answer. And by the way, that's a very popular HRA, but they don't all get this wrong. If you look at the Red Brick HRA, and this was cut and pasted off the Red Brick HRA, it's a little hard to read. They are very clear that healthy fat foods include olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, eggs, dairy products, and lean meats. So Red Brick did manage to get the dairy products into the healthy food. Dairy, by the way, dairy does have saturated fat in it, but as they've learned, they found that not all saturated fat is created equal, and the dairy saturated fat is actually, it has some protective value to it. And here's another very popular HRA giving some horrendous dietary advice. Once again, cut and pasted. They got a few things right. Fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lower fat meats. You know, the majority of people would agree, but I think the jury's still out on fat and meat. But low-fat dairy products have clearly been placed in the healthy category at this point. And newsflash, folks, avoiding adding extra fats and oils, besides not being grammatical, is incorrect. Has anybody not heard of olive oil who writes these HRAs, or even butter, which is actually now considered considerably much healthier than margarine? And let's look at avoiding added sugar in foods and beverages. Folks, this is not a helpful thing. It's not helpful to say somebody avoid something if they don't know how to avoid it. And by contrast, here's a much better question from Quizzify, which is, guess how many times sugar is listed on the label of this granola bar, this Quaker quinoa granola bar. Very healthy looking Quaker, very healthy quinoa, and A is 0. So there's no A, B, C, D because we just copied this right off the site. So A is 0, B is 1, C is 3, D is 10. And this is the ingredients label where you're trying to avoid the added sugars, which means you have to notice them first.
And now here's a question while we're waiting. The HRA examples that you showed look really bad. Can you tell us the names?
Can I tell you the names of the HRAs? I mean, I could, but my inner grown-up says, I tell you what, I don't want to not tell it to you in case you're actually using them. So why don't we just say you can ask separately afterwards? That's a great question. Trust me, I'm very tempted because people are paying a ridiculous amount of money to give their employees bad information. Okay, and I believe the polling results are popping right up momentarily. Oh, here it is. Okay. Yes, we have 84% for D10, which is the correct answer. And there are a few things that employees need to know about this, which is, number one, these things are candy for the most part. These granola bars are candy. Number two, people hide the sugars in the granola bars. They hide the sugars everywhere. Food companies are really, really good at coming up with synonyms for sugar and hiding them here. And the number three thing is beware of long ingredients labels. Nothing good ever came out of a long ingredients label. So here's another typical question that your employees should know and that you're not going to find on an HRA. How does the radiation compare to the radiation in an HRA? More than 100 times as much, 5 to 50 times as much, about the same, or none, which is why doctors recommend them over X-rays. And I'm looking at the Q&A, and I think we got some more questions coming in, Mark.
Yeah, here's one here. Did the risk of an employee suing the employer regarding their wellness program exist before the EEOC regulations were, the rulings were made? Meeting?
Yes, it did. And there were several lawsuits that took place before there was the clarification in 2016. None of the lawsuits were resolved in favor of the plaintiff. And when vendors will tell you, which they will, that, oh, don't worry, there's all this precedent that makes it very difficult for the employees to win. Unfortunately, all that precedent pretty much went by the wayside with this new federal case that does, in fact, define the word voluntary. So great question, and you can't look at, there was precedent, there were a fair number of lawsuits. They did not go in toward the employer, but that's not past, is not indicative of the future this time. And we do have an answer, and the answer is that a plurality said 100 times more than 100 times as much, which is in fact the right answer. And we have some links for you, but the thing which is most important is not just that these things are full of radiation, it's that kids are getting these things, and kids absorb radiation much more than adults. So unless you have a really, really good reason, you got to think about the risk level when you give your kid, when kids are going to get HRA. Are going to get a CT scan. And this is a perfect example of how you can use an HRA to teach employees not to overutilize medical care. You can't just lecture at them. You can't just say, this is how much it's going to cost. And by the way, a lot of people are cutting the co-pays of these scans down to zero if people go to a low-cost scan place. But in the order of words, the great philosopher Peter Drucker, nothing is more wasteful than doing something efficiently that need not be done at all. So oftentimes the answer is not to do it at all, not to go someplace where you're not going to pay for it. And let's talk about opioids. Opioids are a huge thing. Once again, this is cut and pasted from a very popular HRA. It's killing me not to give you the name. I filled this thing out myself, and just to see what they would say, I put down that I have chronic pain. And they said, make sure to see your doctor or condition specialist regularly and follow his or her treatment plan. Well, newsflash, these folks have 8 to 10 minutes to see each patient. What do you think they are recommending? Why do you think there is an opioid epidemic? It's because people went to their doctor or condition specialist, said they had pain, and got opioids. On the other hand, we have an entire opioids awareness quiz, and we have a link to it, and it's one of our most popular free quizzes, and we'd urge you to take a look at it. And one of the questions in it is, when opioids are taken as directed, how long does it take for the first measurable signs of dependency to start? And Mark, I believe, or do we have any other questions? I'm not opening the Q&A panel right now.
Here's one. What if biometric screenings are not mandatory and only allow employees to earn points? And then parentheses, not financial incentives for participating in the biometric screening.
That's a great question, but somehow those points have to be translated into money somehow. If they're just earning points like Monopoly money or something, then they can do it. But I've never heard of a points issue which is not somehow translatable into something of significant financial value. Okay, we have an answer. We have a plurality saying 3 days, which is in fact the correct answer this time. And this is one of the things, if employees know, it might keep them from, if they have a wisdom tooth out or some kind of surgery, just kind of knowing that these are the most addictive substances available on Earth, much more so than cigarettes even, in terms of how long it takes. They might be able to avoid it with a combination of other meds and not the opioids. And speaking of incentives, Mark, and you asked there was a great question there about points and incentives. And somebody asked, what about Quizzify, and is Quizzify involved in incentives? The answer is that yes, we do recommend incentives for Quizzify, and they really do work. You might wonder, what the heck is a skipper doing up here, and what does that have to do with it? Well, in a typical, screening program, if you say, or let's take a typical wellness program, if you say, we'll pay you $100 to take 10,000 extra steps next week, well, some number of people are going to sign up for that. They're going to take the steps, and then at the end of the week, they're going to get their 100, they're going to stop taking the steps. But what if you said, we'll give you a week to memorize the Gilligan's Island theme song, and we'll give you $100, and so the employees will memorize the theme song, they'll get their $100, but at the end of the week, they're not going to be able to unknow that theme song. So, for instance, you're never going to forget that proton pump inhibitors should not be taken every day and long term. You never forget, next time you even look at an opioid, you're going to know how long it takes you to get addicted. You're dropping your almond milk for whole milk, and you're going to read the ingredients on a granola bar, and you're always going to think of them as candy. You're not going to forget what you just learned. And this brings us to the shocking conclusion, which is, and this is actually several questions have come in about this already, what happens to employees in 2019 who decline screens in 2018? So I'm going to say we don't know this for a fact because the answer is self-serving, and it might be wrong. Now, I don't mind having a self-serving answer. I don't mind occasionally having a wrong answer, but I do mind having an answer which is both self-serving and wrong. So I'm going to say we don't know this for a fact, but it does appear that employees may not be assessed a forfeiture in 2019 for declining screens this year. So if you're taking the screen in the fall and the penalty starts in January, that will probably be a no-go. So what does that mean? That means that you'll have a lot of missed employees if you tell them that they need to be screened this year to get a better deal next year, and then next year comes along and say, oh, by the way, it turns out you didn't have to be screened. You'll lose all your cred, and also all your premium differential could inure to all of your employees. You may have to give up the premium differential altogether. Note the word is may. I don't think anybody knows for sure. The only good news that we can say is that if employees do get screened thinking that they're going to get a discount, they will not be able to sue and say, hey, I wouldn't have gotten screened if I'd known I wasn't going to be penalized. That is not a risk. So we would recommend writing a note like this. Dear employees, we're offering screens in the fall. Due to a likely rules change, it may be the case that employees who get the screens may not be able to receive a more favorable health benefit in 2019 than those who don't. Hence, we are also offering a set of health literacy trivia questions, or we are also offering Fitbits or whatever to improve your knowledge about healthcare, and our health benefits. We can guarantee that if you do one or the other, meaning screening or answer a certain number of health literacy questions, or both, you will receive the more favorable benefit. So as long as you have some alternative in there, you're maintaining for sure your ability to charge some employees more than others. Sincerely, Art Vandelay Industries, yada, yada, yada. So adding Quizzify as a 2018 screening alternative makes screening truly voluntary to avoid EEOC rules issue, will maintain your cred, will save money because screening Quizzify costs less, teach employees useful things, but most importantly, it will inoculate you against having to give every employee the better offer in 2019. Putting it all together, and then I think I've seen some questions, so we definitely have 10 minutes for questions. You'll have near total indemnification protection for entire wellness program if you do something like Quizzify or like Fitbit. But if you do Quizzify, employees will learn something, they like the product, da-da-da. I don't want to be too self-serving here, so we'll let that go. So now we have time for some more A and Q. Obviously, I took the Jeopardy theme here. So, Mark, I'm looking at the Q&A, but I think there's some Q&A I can't see here because it came in earlier.
Okay. What are the odds that Congress will step in, or that this will be overturned on appeal?
Okay, it cannot be overturned on appeal. The period for appeal is ended. If I'm a betting person, I would say the odds of Congress stepping in are probably about 2 or 3 to 1 against. So that's a good question. Oh my goodness, I'm seeing a ton of questions here. So if you want to stay on an extra, I think we can answer them all in 10 minutes, but we'll keep this open until we've gotten most of them answered, even if it takes 5 more minutes.
Okay. So next question would be, what is your over-under on what you think the cutoff will be for what is considered a voluntary inducement?
That's another great question. I got to think it's about 3 figures, like 300. We're getting a lot of questions about that. I'm just thinking a lot of these questions are essentially the same. Defining large incentives. How would you define large? if it's me, and mind you, nobody knows because the courts have to interpret it. If I'm the judge, I'm saying, $100 or $200 gift certificate, that's fine with me. You get a life. If you either get screened or you get your 100 or 200, I'm fine with that. You start talking about 500 or 600, and you are absolutely out of the realm of voluntary. So, if I'm guessing, I would say my over/under is about 150 there.
Okay. And what if an employer uses an incentive that's more paid time off?
Another great question. We're getting overwhelmed. We got a lot of people on this call. Paid time off, if it's like an extra day or something, I don't think any court is even going to bother to hear that thing. But if you're starting to talk about like 3 days, then you're talking about a lot of monetary value there, and I think a court would consider that to be an inducement. One more. I thought I kind of answered the large and small thing, but I answered in terms of dollars, not percentages. 30% is the safe harbor now. I would guess the safe harbor is going to be more like 5%. I would say that 5% would probably be the incentive that would be allowed.
Okay. Okay. Here's another one here. And I think you might have answered some of this, but it might be good to reiterate it. Does the ruling apply on a plan year or calendar basis? Our wellness plan year is July 18th through June 19th. How will that affect the Jan 1, 2019 effective date for our fiscal year plan?
Okay. My best indication, and remember, this is one where the answer is self-serving, and I want to make sure everybody knows the answer is self-serving. I could very well be wrong. Is it come January 1, if an employee were to say, I did this involuntarily in order to get according to this court decision, the court decision says as of January, I can't be penalized for doing things involuntarily. I think in the middle of the plan year, I think you might have to change it. Now, I don't know that. I believe it's not knowable, but that would be my guess. I'm sorry, you wouldn't have to change it going backwards. You just have to change it going forward. So if your plan year is June to June or July to June, you end up having to change the Senate for half the time.
Okay, I think here's another one that might, your clarification might help on. EEOC regulations have only been in effect for a couple of years. Wouldn't ER wellness programs go back to the ACA HIPAA incentive rules that allow wellness programs with incentives as long as within HIPAA allowable limits for health contingency programs?
The answer is no, because you're opting in by offering this program. It's leave aside the ACA. You're opting in to the GINA and ADA jurisdiction. As soon as you start you can do 30% incentives for non-medical things till the cows come home. That's an ACA thing. Once you start getting clinical, you're opting into being covered by being addressed by ADA and GINA. So the ACA still applies with the 30% limits. The programs just can't be clinical without opting into ADA and GINA and without them becoming subject to this court rule.
Okay, and I think this is another kind of a clarification to a point you talked about. How should employers respond if their current plan design asks employees to participate in screenings in 2018, but the reward is tied to premium discounts in 2019?
Okay, that's what this is where it's not knowable, but I believe the answer is going to be that the rules will apply. I mean, it's 2019, and very clearly that the safe harbor ends on January 1, 2019. If you want to be inside the safe harbor, you've got to take that incentive/penalty down to the most favorable level for employees. Now, remember, we're not playing lawyers on TV here. This is our best guess, but it is subject to interpretation, and your counsel may answer it differently. This is the best information that we can give you right now.
Okay. And why doesn't every vendor offer indemnification like Quizzify does? And why is Quizzify's indemnification limited to 10 times of our fees?
Okay, that's two great questions. The reason that many vendors don't offer is because they're clinical. They can't offer it. They're the ones who are going to get in trouble. The non-clinical vendors, frankly, their CEOs probably didn't go to law school and haven't anticipated this problem for for years and years, for 2 years. And we limit it to 10 times just because we need insurance ourselves, so we can't be taking unlimited liability. But 10 times our fees should cover a lot of stuff. Boy, Mark, we're just being overwhelmed with questions here. I think we're going to have to end up going 5 minutes over. What else are you saying?
Can you re-explain how safe harbor relates to the points?
Yes, points get translated into dollars. If you're just giving away points and they don't have any kind of value, that's voluntary. I mean, I don't know why anyone would collect them. But if you're just like giving people awards and badges and that kind of things, then you don't have anything to worry about. But as soon as those points are translated to dollars, that's when you have to start thinking about how close am I to 30%? Am I over, it's kind of this voluntary 5% level? Does that answer the question? I think so.
We have another question that came in early in the presentation, but it may make some sense to review this particular point. And you said that, I'll just read it. You said we can't do biometrics in 2018 for plan year penalties in 2019. What is your certainty on this?
Now, my certainty on that is low, okay? Low. I would say if I'm betting even money on this, but this is one of these situations where it's an even money bet, but if you lose it, it could be very expensive for you. Because you have to basically then give everybody the best deal whether or not they took the screens. Like, let's say screening is worth, $1,200 for a family or an individual. Suddenly everyone's going to get $1,200 less than their deductible, a $1,200 more favorable deductible, whether or not they screen. So 50% certainty, but considerable penalty. And like I say, once again, to bring Quizzify in, very, very, very easily addressed simply by having an alternative in 2018.
Okay. And what are your views on direct primary care or on-site, near-site clinics? A lot of them also do HRAs, et cetera, including annual checkups. There is a lot of data that shows good primary care saves versus wellness, correct?
If I had a choice of going to a doc or going to a wellness vendor and having somebody in a white coat tell me to fit into my skinny jeans, I'm going to go to the doc anytime. The way that these the on-site and near-site and direct primary care save money isn't necessarily, is rarely by preventing the onset of a heart attack or something like that, but rather by helping people, getting people treated for everyday things where they don't have to take half a day off from work or anything like that. The short answer is on-site and near-site clinics the other thing is on-site and near-site clinics are generally either there's no impact on the deductible or the points. People just go to them. So you're in the area of paying claims at that point, or not paying claims, or having it be a one-time annual fee. As long as there's no sort of incentive, like big incentive, for somebody to go get a screening through a clinic, you're absolutely fine with that. Okay, we still have a ton of questions, so we're going to stay on. Mark, do you have any more? Because I'm just seeing a whole bunch here.
Yeah. For a general, and I think this kind of reiterates some of the points I'm just trying. Okay, for a general wellness program that requires a health assessment / biometric screening in order to earn a financial incentive, but is not directly tied to the health plan, does this new EEOC ruling apply?
Yes.
Okay. And another question here, can you define large in terms of penalties / incentives?
This is for the courts to decide, but if I'm an over-under guy, I'm saying about 5% as opposed to 30%. That would be my bet.
Why are employers and brokers still encouraging bad HRAs and biometric screenings? It seems that EEOC incentives are small other than perhaps being a tipping point against this penalties/rewards?
I have absolutely no idea why brokers continue to push things that they know with essentially drop-dead certainty are of virtually no value other than that they're getting commissions for them. I mean, this is a $64,000 question. I wish I knew the answer.
I believe many agents use HRA or PMI/claims data to take groups from fully funded to self-funded plans and rely on wellness companies to get that data. How often do you suggest they do that in the future so that they can get a group underwritten?
I'm going to have to say that I'm not an expert on underwriting at all, so I have to pass on that question altogether rather than be wrong. It's a great question. I just don't know the answer.
If I offer an alternative that doesn't make HRAs or biometric screening voluntary, and then I don't have to change the HRA questions because someone can opt out for a non-medical alternative.
Yes, let me just repeat that question. If I offer an alternative, doesn't that make HRAs and biometric screens voluntary? Yes, it absolutely does. Then you do not have to change the HRA in the slightest because somebody can opt out of it, as long as you have that alternative and they can make their points on the alternative.
All right. And another question here to confirm, you are saying that the ADA safe harbor goes away for a bona fide benefit plan. ACA outcome-based programs are no longer allowed, question mark?
No, you can do outcomes-based programs. Number one, you're just outside the safe harbor if you do. And number two, most employees aren't going to participate unless there's a large amount of money at stake. But they're still legal. And the ADA safe harbor here is not about a bona fide benefit plan. It's specifically about wellness programs. It does not affect the offer of health insurance generally. This particular court decision.
Okay. And here is a question that sort of coincides with that. Why is there no difference between outcomes-based and participation-based or between incentives and penalties?
Well, there's no difference between incentives and penalties because most incentives were basically combined with a move to a high deductible plan where the employer said, we got bad news and good news. The bad news is your deductible just went up $2,000. But the good news is, here are some ways you can earn it back. So the court, I think, wisely realized that in the immortal words of the great philosophers, the undisputed truth from 1971, a smile is just a frown turned upside down. So in fact, an incentive that's tied as part of a high deductible health plan was really a penalty that just was made to look like an incentive. If you have a program, and my wife is in one of these, where it's a regular program and they simply just add a couple $100 as an incentive to do wellness, I can tell you with pretty good certainty that no court is gonna find for that in favor of the employee, because that looks like a genuine incentive. What Judge Bates in this federal case was trying to do was get rid of ungenuine incentives, was get rid of penalties disguised as incentives.
And where can we find additional information about the EEOC rules and changes?
That's a great question. I would say just write to me at al@quizzify.com, and I have a bibliography that will take you through not including this March. It will take you up to but not including March, and then I'll also send you a link to March, what they said in March.
All right, and can you please address the literature out there that says that health education information doesn't necessarily change behavior?
The literature says that health education information does change behavior vis-a-vis. There's been studies on ER visits and vaccines and a few other things. Can I tell you with certainty that if somebody takes Quizzify, they're going to change their health behavior? No, but certainly plenty of people have told us on our website that they do. But the difference between this and wellness and straight screening is that screenings have been shown not to change behavior, whereas with health literacy, there's at least a chance that they will change behavior. And I just ask yourself. I mean, you just saw 3 or 4 questions. Did you change behavior? Are you going to look at granola bars or proton pump inhibitors or CAT scans the same way again? And the answer is probably not. Ergo, behavior change.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we still have close to 100 people on the call. I think I'd like to just mention at this point that we will send the slide deck as well as the recording that will be available in about 24 hours from the webcasting service here to anyone that wants to email us. And if you can email Mark, M-A-R-K, at Quizzify.com, and we'll make sure that you get both the slide deck with the links to the studies and the other additional information, as well as the full recording of today's webinar. So I know it's getting later here, just to mention that, because we've had a lot of questions here about trying to get a hold of the slides as well as the recordings.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up. I'm actually very impressed and slightly flattered that this many people stayed on. But one more question: did you learn something useful? And mind you, the answers are publicly posted, so we're taking a risk here. Did you learn something useful in this webinar? And your choices are yes about EEOC and employee health, yes only about employee health, yes only about EEOC in 2019, or no, we're sticking with our HRA and our employees already know how to avoid sugar, skim milk, and CAT scans. So we're putting this answer up for everybody to see. And then we'll, if you have any questions we didn't answer, and I think there was one more that I just saw, which is if things are completely voluntary, HRAs and screens are completely voluntary, then absolutely you can keep offering them. Okay, we got a whole bunch of people, and we're just waiting for this final answer here, and I got my fingers crossed. My heart is pounding that D is not going to be the majority. Mark, I think we're all out of questions at this point, right? We've answered them all.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's someone just said they're having trouble connecting to the network, so I think we might have. Oh no, the poll has ended. Okay, all right. Hello, everybody. 77% said both, so that was A, and I think only one person said D. I'd like to know who that one person is, right, directly, because I'm very curious. And a few people said B and C. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll send you the slides. All you got to do is ask, and ask any follow-up questions. Just direct them to Mark, and if I can answer them, I will.
And that's Mark, M-A-R-K, at Quizzify.com. Please contact me for the slides as well as the recording. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And thanks for hanging in with us for a good hour. Much appreciated.